Like Joe Biden all of 2020 hiding in his basement, John Fetterman, who is the Democrat candidate for Senate in Pennsylvania, has also been hiding out in his basement his whole campaign. Or maybe it's Jeffrey Dahmer's basement. Seriously, what is going on with this guy? He had a stroke earlier this year and took some time off to try to recover, but he stayed in the campaign. And his public speeches have been, well, honestly, sad. He won't release his medical records. He hasn't been doing any interviews because it's embarrassing. And so finally now he has decided to do an actual sit-down interview, and it went like this.
His campaign required that he be allowed to use a transcription program on his computer during our interview.
I always thought I was pretty emphatic. I think I was very, empathetic. That's an example of the stroke, empathetic. Yeah. I always thought I was very empathetic before having a stroke. But now after having that stroke, I really understand, much more kind of the challenges that Americans have day in and day out.
So having a stroke made him more qualified to be a United States Senator, he says. And the reason he demanded that the closed caption software was part of his interview is because he's having a hard time understanding language. His brain can't process it properly. It often just sounds like a bunch of nonsense. He can read language, which is why he needed the transcription device during that interview and why he's refusing to do interviews because, like I said, it's embarrassing, and why he has refused to debate Dr. Oz, his Republican opponent. And as the midterms approach, there's really no way for the liberal media to even try to spin this.
Because of his stroke, Fetterman's campaign required closed captioning technology for this interview to essentially read our questions as we ask them. And Lester, in small talk before the interview, without captioning, it wasn't clear he was understanding our conversation.
Now, after that interview, again, the first sit-down interview that he's done since he had his stroke, and the reporter's commentary on what happened off camera, a bunch of people on Twitter started complaining that NBC News was being ableist. Ableist, if you haven't kept up with your social justice terms, it's sort of like racist and sexist, which are primarily just fake terms, but it refers to somebody who discriminates against somebody because they're disabled. It's going to be real interesting over the next 27 or however many days are left until the midterms, because all the big tech platforms have policies against mocking or hating anybody who is disabled. And I wouldn't put it past them if they start censoring posts and videos that are just concerned about John Fetterman's ability to actually carry out his duties if he were to win. You're not supposed to say this, but obviously sometimes disabled people aren't qualified for certain jobs. For example, you're not going to have a blind person teaching driver's ed because obviously they're going to need to see how well the students are driving. Here's Fetterman talking about his favorite NFL team.
And the Eagles are so much better than the Eagles.
There are so many more. I don't want to show a compilation of it because, like I said, it's sad and I don't want to be mocking him for his medical condition. But thankfully, like all Democrats, he is also a hypocrite. So we can definitely highlight that.
How would you work with colleagues in the Senate toward climate change legislation while also being pro-fracking?
I've always supported, as long as it's done environmentally sound.
I don't support fracking at all, and I never have.
I called for a moratorium on fracking. There's no such thing as a green fracker.
I'm not pro-fracking.
2016 fracking moratorium pledge that Fetterman signed for an environmental watchdog group, as well as a 2016 tweet he sent while running for U.S. Senate.
I don't support fracking. I think it's something that has to eventually go away, and I would like to see it, transition out.
And by the way, does John Fetterman own any clothes other than a hoodie? He literally looks like a homeless person. That's all he wore all summer long. It's just his black hoodie. Listen, I understand not wanting to wear a suit and a tie, and I actually think ties are one of the dumbest fashion traditions that we actually have in our society, but at least wear like a button-up shirt or a polo or something. He literally looks like Uncle Fester from the Addams Family. His Republican opponent, Dr. Oz, isn't the greatest candidate. He's a terrible candidate. I can't sugarcoat things, but at this point, it's all that we have. And if you live in Pennsylvania, it's basically like you're starving and you come across an empty pizza box with just some leftover pieces of crust that are starting to mold, and some dog poop. And you know that you could eat the pizza crust. It's not going to taste very good. It's going to taste terrible. It might make you sick later, but it'll at least carry you on for a little ways. Or you could eat the dog poop. Taking back control of the Senate hinges on Pennsylvania and Georgia, which is why the media is so focused on protecting Fetterman and taking down Dr. Oz, and also taking down Herschel Walker in Georgia, who again isn't the greatest candidate, but he's all we have at this point, so I don't care if he clubbed a baby seal. If you live in Georgia, vote for him. It's either him or Raphael Warnock, the Democrat, who literally calls himself the pro-choice pastor. That's his day job before he became a senator. He was a pastor of some church, probably a satanic temple, and he calls himself the pro-choice pastor. But speaking of mentally incapacitated politicians, is there anything that you'd like to add, old Joe?
Let me start off with 2 words. Made in America.
Those are actually 3 words, Joe, but it's the thought that counts. To support my work, order my books in paperback from Amazon.com, or click the join button below the video to sponsor my channel with a paid membership, or click the thanks button below the video to leave the channel a tip in the form of what's called a super thanks in the comments, which will highlight your comment in color, and it's a great way to support my channel. So take a look below the video for the join or the thanks button, and check them out.